All right, so we live. And again, this is just going to be for the transcript. I'll make it private so
Okay.
can't nobody find it on the page. How did you come to the politics of the New African Independence Movement? That was the first question.
I think for me, it was a slow process of, getting politicized. I tell people often, like I got politicized because my mom would tell me stories about growing up in Jim Crow down south from South Carolina. And one of her best stories, or favorite stories, I should say, was when she was young and she was in a whites only playground and she got chased out by cops, a white cop, but she was with her friend. She was slower. And so she got hit in the back with a billy club, and she has a scar to this day on her back from that incident. And she would, tell stories about that and other things. But still, my mom, a dark-skinned Black woman, still looked at whiteness as something to envy or aspire to. And so when she had my sister's father is a light-skinned Black man and my father's a white man, and that was part of her idea around what would give her kids a better shot or chance in life, right? And so and my mom was a very honest person, so hearing that kind of story and listening to her stories down south, it just got you thinking about how the world worked, growing up mostly in the projects, trying to just figure out your place in the world, your neighborhood, your block, why your block don't have resources, other places have resources, and that kind of thing. So I think, like a lot of folks, it got me, reading and listening or watching documentaries on the civil rights movement, and then I started reading Malcolm, right? And so reading the autobiography was sort of a seminal moment of hearing about sort of not only just Black life, but a certain particular sort of ideological view around what it would take for us as a people to get liberated or to fight for power or struggle around issues that we need to sort of work out. And part of that within some of a nation framework was around controlling institutions and creating economic enterprises and that kind of stuff. So even though I was in a religious dude, that stuff started me thinking. I think in Malcolm's last chapter, he talks about, some people have an ideology of taking over states in the South and that kind of thing. And so, slowly reading, taking that stuff into account. I think by the mid 1990s, I came in contact with folks from the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And I had already been joining a whole bunch of different organizations that were specifically Black nationalist organizations. So at that particular point, that organization talking about the Black Belt theory, talking about new African independence, talking about Black liberation, that resonated with me. Like nationalism had already resonated with me. The idea of self-determination resonated with me. And then something that seemed to be, even if not necessarily thought of as attainable, but the idea that this was something that gave a framework for the sort of ideological path that I wanted to walk down. And so not only was it nationalist, but it was anti-capitalist, right? At least in theory and in sort of presentation. It meant that we had to construct a fairer, a different anti-capitalist economy, and it geared toward, it wasn't specifically always saying socialism, but for me, that was geared towards socialism, right? What is it around the redistribution of wealth and resources, thinking of markets differently, that was different in this particular ideological formation than in some others that I've read and studied. And I still, to this day, consider myself part of a new African struggle. And definitely, I consider myself to be a revolutionary nationalist as sort of the core ideological belief system that I still practice and believe in, that still drives my work.
I might, when we write that out, type it up. I see you over there when we type that up. Come back with some dates or something like that.
Okay.
But that'll get when we get to the written phase. But I think that was solid. So let me see. So one of the major intellectual and organizing initiatives of the New African Independence movement of the last 25 years was the Jackson Kush Plan. Tell us about your role in helping to develop and execute this plan. That was the second question.
Mm-hmm.
But hold on before you start, because IO
Yeah.
they're acting a fool. Hold on. IO. I can hear y'all all the way over here. Chill out.
We're playing chicken and pasta. We're playing chicken.
These two wrestling. Okay, go ahead, come on.
So I think my role in Jackson Kush, was an early proponent and supporter, of course. I feel like the hard writing, I think, goes to you. Like, I think that's something that came out of obviously different frameworks that we'd already been involved in that. But I think the specific idea around, as an organization, we were in a transition period. In terms of my recollection, Obama had just won the election, so all these ideas around, could a Black person be the president, and what does that mean for nationalism and nationalist thought, and what does that mean for the organization when Black folks are now more married to the Democratic Party than ever? So I think the idea of the Jackson Plan was something for the organization, was sort of a reset. Like, how do we use this moment to advance our politics? And how do we do something that combines the different elements of our politics in the electoral arena and outside the electoral arena, i.e. the dual power philosophy of what do we do again to really establish actual organizational structures and infrastructures, ownership of things, right? How do we broaden from this sort of an ideological message and event planning, some organizing around political prisoners? How do we get to a point where we are actually showing the way, like a path, a project that could be a model project for others to implement and to emulate, right? So for me, it was an easy kind of like, yes, this is what we need now. Like we'd had some of the 5-year plans, which were obviously similarly based on choosing some areas in the South. But I think the Jackson Plan became this specific idea that brought into what were some of the things that we had on our side that made Jackson so attractive, right? We had, at least again at the time, we thought a well-established organization. We definitely Chokwe Lumumba was a noted important figure in Jackson. And as we remember, at first, Chokwe was opposed to the plan in terms of running for any office, right? And it was me and yourself and some other folks that sort of hemmed Chokwe up and said, Chokwe, like, you running for mayor is integral to this plan working. And at the time, it was not necessarily even winning, but the running and the organizing and the name gathering and sort of just taking that organizing to a different level. And he was opposed. And it was only through sort of a lot of back and forth that we had with him that he decided to run not for mayor, but for city council. And so, I think this plays in later. I know there's always like sort of movement, sort of storytelling about how folks decide to run. I don't know if I met any elected official, radical or not, who didn't claim that the people drafted them to run. Was like, it wasn't just the people, it was the people behind the scenes that drafted you to run. And it's a good thing you decided to make that decision, at least at that time. And I think, the thing that I give the people in Jackson the most credit for was the successful run for the city council. Because I think for a lot of us, at least for me from the outside looking in, the support that I did individually with sort of helping with fundraising and maybe some writing was around at that early stage. Even if he didn't win, we could do ABC. And I think folks had confidence in Jackson that because of who Chokwe was, that they could win. And I think later on, the idea of many of us as organizers doing the same thing that Chokwe did and others in terms of the Republic of New Africa, NAPO history, was moving to the South and moving to Jackson became something that was far more from idea in theory to actual something we should bring into practice. And so individually, raised money to start a project in Jackson. My family, we moved to Jackson. We had our daughter in Jackson. And so the idea was to go down and to help fill out what we could in terms of implementing the Jackson Plan. So I think I was early on one of the first folks who sort of strove to really implement the different aspects of the plan, including the electoral work, but also, again, the idea of economic development. It wasn't as developed as cooperatives, but it was around us owning land and property and housing to facilitate other organizers coming down there. And so I think I was, sort of like in some ways, early guinea pig for going down in Jackson and helping to see what the structures were like, what we could get accomplished, whatever organizing experience, helping to support the local folks in terms of the work that they were doing. And as you know, when I came down, I became the campaign manager when we decided to run or support Tyrone Lewis for sheriff of Hinds County, and ultimately he won as the first Black sheriff of Hinds County. I was Shokway's first campaign manager for the first 6 months of his campaign for mayor, and so involved, intricately in helping to write the platform, organizing, mobilizing the chapter, organizing resources for the work to do that. And so, I would just say, like, I was a sort of a general all around, as I've probably been most of my life, in terms of organizer of people, resources, and personnel and infrastructure as best I could in terms of Jackson. So early proponent, a carry outer of the plan as much as I could, and helping to get other personnel to move down and to sort of facilitate and implement the Jackson Plan is what I would say was my real role in terms of the plan itself.
Let's go back a little bit. What will be the key pieces? Because one of the things I really want to highlight to folks is like the longer view of how we got here. So let me see what will be. So, like, the talking about the work that you led in, particularly in the organization, even though it didn't pan out as we wanted it to and we needed it to, but you leading the charge, towards trying to move the group collectively to buy land. Going back to 2001, the piece in Alabama, that you took the lead on, took some L's on, because I want to set some of the record straight, and have it documented. I mean, if only 10 motherfuckers read this book, whatever, at least it'd be officially on record. Like, these were the steps, these were the things, and whether it worked out or not, we learned from this experiment and then sharpen this up, So if you want to add on to that, we can come back to it later, but I just want to make sure it is in there.
So I'll say, I think as an organization, there was a time where we as an organization were probably the leading Black nationalist type formation in the United States, right? But I also think during that time period, there was a sense of, and this would be like the mid 90s, I would say, maybe later in the 90s and stuff like that, in early 2000s, that there was a time period where it felt, even for us, I think that there was a little wheel spinning, right? There was a little bit of, I think me and you would get into some discussions and even debates around, what we were doing and whether or not that was really even organizing, right? Like, I think talking about event planning and some of the stuff that we were doing on both coasts and even in the South, how that was really moving us forward. And again, when we talk about our ideology of new African independence and a revolutionary nationalist ideology, what did we have besides some organizing collectives that people could see as sort of models of development? And I think, obviously our history goes back to the Republic of New Africa and the folks who broke away and started the New African independence movement, and who moved to the South to do that kind of work. but who, quite frankly, kind of got settled, and some things happened and some things different. And then, people would come and go, and then the organization as an apparatus seemed really sometimes thin in terms of what it was to, if we were to accomplish our larger goals, right? We owned no property, right? Our infrastructure was mostly, if not almost exclusively, volunteer. At that time, we were just beginning maybe to pick the surface of what even grants look like. We did base a model of organizing that was on the 60s and 70s, sort of Black Power model of like you joined based on ideology, and then you figured out resources in a very sort of hand to mouth, what you got for the collection plate kind of thing. And I think we started to make that turn. We need more resources. We need to do more. We need larger plans and ideas. And so, part of that, and I give credit to people like Cliff and April, who in Selma started sort of an iteration of a plan of like building a nucleus of, again, electoral power and trying to build outside economic engines that gave us a bigger opportunity for growth in Selma, Alabama, right? And I think part of our discussions around a 5-year plan were originally even a much grander idea around what we need to do to sort of bear resources in the South. And, I think there was a lot of mishing and mashing, and some of it didn't happen the way we wanted it to. And I think at some point I did step in and sort of started constructing a smaller version of a larger idea around 5-year plans, which were around what can we do to bring resources to our Southern chapters, right? And part of that was purchasing of land. Well, how can we call ourselves an organization around the independence and the freeing of land when we own no land, right? And so, I, as well as some other folks in New York, started leading the call to raise money to purchase land down. And we raised a good amount of property and bought lands in Lowndes County, Alabama, about 25 acres, if I remember. And then the idea was that we would use that land to develop it. It would be a home for our Camp Pumzico. It would be a retreat center and all that kind of stuff. And we purchased the land, and we bought it in my name because we didn't have the organizational apparatus to buy it in an organization's name, which would take a larger down payment and so forth. And to be honest, too, some of this sort of exposed some of the folks' cracks and or weaknesses in our formation for me. Right, because the part of the idea around buying the land was that we were going to purchase the land and then build a structure, but we had a limited time to convert the mortgage from a land purchase to a conventional 30-year mortgage. And the task was supposed to be taken up by some of our elders in the movement, and that task just never was. And so eventually, unfortunately, the purchase of the land happened, but within a year and change, the land was foreclosed on, and it became a blip on my individual financial record. And I didn't, I don't mind a try and a fail that happens. For me, a moment of caution or concern is the kind of try, right? It's one thing to try really hard and not meet your goals. It's another thing to sort of talk about what's needed, but the implementation of the ideas didn't come to fruition, right? And so I think that it didn't deter from people from continually trying and developing. I think we developed actually 2 5-year plans before we actually, within the second time of the 5-year plan, developed the Jackson plan, which became, again, very specific. But part of the idea, again, was that we were going to get more resources to our Southern chapters. We were looking out to buy things. And again, classic kind of ideas around socialist communist thought based on our readings of sort of what happened during the Soviet Union, even, right, was that the dual power idea was something that was needed. You couldn't just try to develop power from the outside, knowing that the state could use this apparatus to destroy you at any second and had the resources of taxes to come after you. You couldn't just try to go after the resources of the state because the state is so powerful that it would make you play their game, dance to their tune, as opposed to you thinking you're making changes within the state. The state is making changes on you to make you fit your politics within what they need to keep everything going. So you have to have that power outside, which became the idea around the people's assemblies. So not only economic power block, but a broader political power block around the people's assemblies, which could put pressure on any state apparatus, whether it was our person in or not, right? It wasn't about being chummy necessarily with the candidate that we got in office, but what were the demands of the people that we were suggesting that whoever was in power, even if that person was related to our formation, what were the demands that could be made upon that person? Because that outside pressure was there to use to say, we are going to force your hand, even if you had some, some dilly-dallying or some second thoughts, or you were just
hold on. Pause for a second. Come on, pause for a second, because it's wigging out. So let me try to plug this thing straight up into the router, to the wireless thing and see if that'll actually help. Saki, where's the blue cord to plug into the go off camera? Just hold on, just a quick second. Come on.
Even when you do that, but go ahead and do it. Is T's computer closed? T! Is your computer closed?
Did you call me?
Yeah, is your computer closed? We need your computer to get off the Wi-Fi.
What?
We need your computer to not be on the Wi-Fi.
Okay, yeah, it just cut me off. It's definitely our
your Wi-Fi,
cheap Wi-Fi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
All right, it's not stable enough. It's probably too many people on in the neighborhood. You got the hood. So
what do you want to do?
Let's do a part 2. Just text me sometimes when you got available. I think we got like another hour of this.
Okay.
And then we'll just pick it up from there. There's next. Okay. I'm good through Sunday, basically.
Okay, I'll text you. After I get off, I'll just get up my phone and I'll text you sometimes.
Okay, all right. Then we got to catch up on the other work stuff too. I got some ideas. I'll email you some start stuff, and then we'll go from there.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, Black. All right. Peace.
Later.